This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, Evan Jansen. This show is always live and it's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, you can also watch us live on YouTube with the whole show available later on demand on our YouTube channel. Now, after a difficult meeting in Brussels yesterday, European leaders failed to agree on a plan to deal with the escalating refugee crisis across the continent. We'll be live in Brussels shortly for an update. Then the discovery of Homo naledi continues to polarize here in South Africa. Our question of the day deals with it. It says, can creation and evolution coexist? That's a question we ask of you at SABC Newsroom, is where you give us your contribution. We'll continue this discussion for the rest of the week here. Then it's International Democracy Day. We ask some tough questions of democracy a little bit later in the show. Then we close today with a look at the demonic game Charlie Charlie, especially how it's playing out on social media. But first, let's get the day's news from Anine Dormal.
Good morning, I'm Anine Dormal. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. One worker has been killed and 4 others injured after a crane collapse at Eskom's Sile power station in Witbank in Mpumalanga. Construction work has now been temporarily halted pending the outcome of an Eskom investigation into the cause of the incident. The situation outside the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Westville campus remains tense this morning. Students' organisation SASCO has warned that protests at the campus will be intensified and possibly spread to other campuses. The university was closed yesterday after students damaged property and set vehicles alight. Students are protesting an increase in registration fees for 2016.
You know that we don't have sufficient money to pay for our registration, so that's why they increase the mass so that the number of us in this university can be shut down.
Meanwhile, the Vaal University of Technology in Gauteng says cameras will soon be installed at the institution. This as students say they want their safety guaranteed. Classes have been suspended at the university after 2 female students were killed at an off-campus residence. The woman accused of murdering rapper Nkululeko Flaba Habedi is expected to take the stand in the High Court sitting in Randburg today. Sindisiwe Manxele will testify on the events leading up to his fatal stabbing. Manxele has admitted that she fatally stabbed the award-winning rapper at his home in Alexandra in March this year. She claims Habedi was assaulting her. In the state of California, it's been estimated that 2 wildfires have driven 23,000 people from their homes. Officials in the United States say this happened in the north of the state, which is suffering from severe drought. 1 person has died and many others are reported missing. In Australia, Malcolm Turnbull will soon be sworn in as Australia's Prime Minister today. This comes just hours after masterminding a coup against Conservative leader Tony Abbott. Turnbull will be Australia's 4th Prime Minister in just over 2 years. And the future of 120,000 asylum seekers remains uncertain as European Union ministers have failed to agree on a quota system to distribute the additional 120,000 people across the bloc. The EU held an emergency meeting in Brussels to discuss the refugee crisis yesterday. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just simply search for SABC Newsroom. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thanks, Anine. Now, even as 3 more countries followed Germany introducing border checks to control the flood of refugees, the European Union failed to agree on a modest plan last night. An agreement would have forced individual countries to take in a share of some of the hundreds of thousands now seeking asylum in Europe. Gathering in Brussels for an emergency meeting, interior ministers from across Europe agreed to share 40,000 migrants sheltering in Greece and Italy, but only on a voluntary basis, a watered-down version of a plan that was announced in May. As the fractious meeting stretched into the night, there seemed little prospect that ministers would endorse a new plan put forward last week by Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the European Commission. This program would see the resettlement of a further 120,000 asylum seekers that would be compulsory for member countries. Now, our European correspondent Jack Parrock joins us from Brussels live via Skype this morning. Good morning, Jack. Thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure, Ewan.
A difficult meeting, a fractious meeting yesterday. What's the latest?
Well, it was a very interesting meeting indeed. Firstly, we heard that the 40,000 places would be confirmed, but that wasn't too surprising. We were expecting that, and it was something that was agreed back in May. But when the ministers left the meeting, they kind of made out like the 120,000 places had been agreed. And basically that's because they agreed that when they did put this quota system into place, it would be for an additional 120 asylum places for the refugees in Hungary, in Greece and in Italy. But they haven't agreed any way of implementing those places, where those places would be, who would get them and how they would get those people to take up those places. So essentially they've agreed a number but no other details. So there is some disappointment, and the EU is continuing to be criticised for not acting quickly enough in this refugee crisis that is the worst since the end of the Second World War for the European Union.
They didn't even agree on a joint statement at the end of the meeting, Jack, which is in itself concerning. And then they're only going to meet in about a month's time. Surely much more immediate action is needed.
Indeed, they didn't come up with conclusions, which is very, very uncommon for this kind of meeting. Generally, some kind of collective statement is put together, but it only serves to show the fractions and the deep divisions in opinion between the EU member states. Countries like Hungary, countries like the Czech Republic and Slovakia in the east, they say that imposing these quotas will only encourage more refugees to arrive on European Union borders and shores. Whereas countries like Germany, who are taking the lion's share of the refugees, they say that there needs to be some support and some help and some distribution across the bloc. As you mentioned, there are not going to be any meetings immediately. We can expect potentially that there might be in the next week or so, but really now the pressure is on for a big summit in Valletta in Malta in November, when EU leaders are meeting to discuss this migration policy and what the EU can really do to come up with a kind of firm a firm policy set and a plan for the future of the European Union, because this problem doesn't appear to be going away within even the next few months or years.
The immediate concern is for the refugees. We see on this side plans for detention camps. Have you seen any announcements on this?
So some member states are saying that they want to impose detention centres in order to process the refugees. Some borders have been closed between Austria and Germany. That is pretty significant. They've enacted a clause within the Schengen Agreement, which is the EU border-free zone, to do so. And other countries are saying they need to process people through detention centres. Essentially what's happened is that there's very little control. Once these people enter into the European Union, they're spreading around the bloc. They have free movement, and that is causing a lot of kind of chaos, and they can't register people properly or control where they're moving or find where they first arrived, etc. So that is why they're imposing the detention centres. But there are reports in countries like Hungary that these detention centres are not treating the refugees very well, and that many of the refugees are refusing to enter them.
Now, Jack, Britain were well against a quota system at yesterday's meeting. David Cameron has since travelled to Lebanon to defend Britain's much criticised response to this crisis. What did he say?
Now, the United Kingdom very much wants to control its own migration policy. That is part of the UK's position within the European Union. Now, Britain, Ireland and Denmark, they have opt-outs of this quota system, this proposed quota system, and they almost certainly will always opt out on any sort of EU-imposed immigration and migration and refugee places that the EU says they have to take. The UK has said that they will accept 5,000 Syrian refugees from the refugee camps in countries like Lebanon and from places in Syria. They don't want to take the burden from the European Union countries.
Now, Jack, with borders closed or being closed or in the process of being closed, what does it mean for refugees who are walking across Europe now? The UN said they feel that these people are now in sort of legal limbo.
Indeed, it's very complicated. The European Union has a system called the Dublin system, which basically means that a refugee that arrives in the EU borders must claim asylum in the first country that they are detected, essentially where they enter the EU's borders. So many of them are entering in Hungary, Italy and Greece. And the European Union essentially then, if they are found in another country, they're meant to be kind of transferred back to that country for their asylum request to be processed there. Obviously, with so many people entering into the European Union and spreading across the bloc, it's becoming impossible to enforce that regulation. So that they're trying to control the borders as they cross. But the Schengen zone that was instated since 1995 of border-free movement, I can leave here in Belgium and go immediately into Germany without a border check, just on a train or whatever. That is a system that allows free movement, and it's causing a lot of problems for how to deal with these people. We say the European Union wants to impose these quota systems, but they need to know where the people are going and where they are in order to put them into force.
Jack, I thank you for that update. That's our European correspondent, Jack Parrott, giving us an update from Brussels after that meeting yesterday. Now, just to recap for you, European Union ministers, they failed to agree on a quota system to distribute an additional 120,000 asylum seekers across the European bloc. The EU held an emergency meeting in Brussels to discuss the refugee crisis that has led to evident divisions among its member countries.
Hungary is tightening controls on its border with Serbia, across which they've already built a 4-metre-high barbed wire fence, causing refugees to rush to make the crossing into the European Union. Meanwhile, EU ministers meeting in Brussels were trying to find an agreement on a plan to share the burden of asylum seekers.
We formally, as the President said before, adopted the decision to relocate 40,000 refugees from Italy and Greece. But for our proposal, on 120,000, we did not have the agreement we wanted.
The quota system is heavily opposed by Eastern EU states, as they say it will encourage more refugees to come.
The Union is continuing to try to resolve the deepening refugee crisis. Many here say it's calling into question the core values of the bloc, of solidarity and compassion, but it's also raising questions about whether the EU's border-free zone can survive.
The meeting came while a number of EU countries like Germany, Austria, Slovakia and the Netherlands temporarily reimposed border checks to try to control the flows of refugees. Free movement between most EU nations has been unrestricted since 1995.
Europe should tackle this together. There is a lot of nice words, but in reality we do see that as soon as the temperature is rising in terms of the numbers of refugees arriving, states do tend to go back to their own national interests.
Most of the refugees entering the EU are from conflict-torn countries like Eritrea, Somalia and Syria. And while the EU struggles to find a collective response, many more are continuing to arrive. Jack Parrott, SABC News, Brussels.
Some even say this could be the end of the European Union. What are the comments that we've been seeing on social media? Well, they've been varied, and there have been lots of them. Yeah, we have Umi saying, today we see refugee crisis, and yet many wish they were refugees to Dar al-Islam. Marilyn Shepherd says, will you stop saying the EU has a migrant crisis when we know the people are refugees? You are so friggin' lazy. So some of them are more than lazy, my dear. There's a definite move in the media. EU refugee crisis. UK will take the lead role in dealing with the source of refugees. France and UK will deploy troops within weeks. Says Bill G. Science Corner says it goes a little deeper. The refugee crisis, the European refugees crisis. And there you have a picture of, right now, hundreds of thousands of people flocking across the continent. There's a picture that gives you an idea of what the conditions around these people's lives are right now. Now we move on. Last week, the discovery, which is set to change the way we think about our origins, was unveiled to the world. Homo naledi, found in a remote, deep underground chamber of the Rising Star Cave in October 2013, 1.5 kilometers from Sterkfontein. But the latest find has been met with different reactions by both scientists who question its authenticity and various religious bodies who believe that the latest find contradicts and casts spotlight onto the creation story. The African Christian Democratic Party released a statement last week saying that the organization supports scientific endeavors, believing God has many hidden mysteries still to be discovered by mankind. The party also diffused assumptions that the latest find could cause a shift in Christianity in the country in terms of how we think about the creation and the Bible. The South African Council of Churches also weighed in on the matter, saying the discovery of Homo naledi doesn't prove the theory that humans come from baboons. Now, from our parliamentary studios, we are joined by the ACDP's parliamentary whip, Sherilyn Dudley. A very good morning to you, Sherilyn.
Good morning, Evan, and good morning to your viewers.
An interesting find it was. Just quickly give us your views on the hullabaloo that's been going on around Homo naledi.
A very interesting find. So it's obvious that people will be excited, and I should imagine people in the area are looking in terms of increasing tourism and visitors to the area, and that would be exciting for people in the area. Obviously, for scientists, it's exciting. It's the work they've been working on for some time. And, generally beyond that, I'm really a bit confused as to why there's so much excitement, because, I mean, we just have to look around us in the world today and we see the most incredible diversity. We see across the globe bone structure and body types and all kinds of things, which really why we would think that this find would completely sort of, turn the world on and sort of short it off its axis, I really don't know. Everything that science finds is, for us as Christians, is just more confirmation of the most incredible God who has actually just evidence of his creation and in everything that we see.
Now, we've asked our viewers a question today because of everything that's been going on, and the question, I'd like you to answer the question as well. The question asks, can evolution and religion coexist? At times it feels like this is a difficult question to answer.
For me, it's not a difficult question because I think it clearly does coexist, except that, of course, people over-dramatize the idea of evolution. I mean, there's small degrees of evolution, or actually what is probably better described as adaptation in little ways. If you have a certain skin type and you spend most of your time in a certain part of the world, very often you adapt to that part of the world and that climate, etc. So we see adaptation in some degree all around us. And we also see the most amazing thing, that right back since the beginning of time, that so little has changed. So we have the incredible idea of us being able to change to suit our circumstances, and at the same time how much remains the same.
Does the Bible say anything at all about the creation, evolution discussion?
I'm not a scientist, and I haven't focused in that particular area. And I think just generally the gist of the Bible is a kind of evolution in the sense of people discovering new places to be, creating new communities, discovering more about God, discovering more about themselves, adapting to the areas that they find themselves in, and then wanting to explore and pioneer new areas, and then adapting to those areas. So, man's idea of the word evolution, he's given it his own meaning, and different people have given it their own meaning. But for me, there is a sense of us moving forward. I think the Christian understanding or worldview would be that we don't go in circles. We move forward. We have a beginning, we have an end, and we move forward in that. And so in that sense, there's an evolving into who we're going to be, what we're going to do, fulfilling our purpose in life. So to me, the concepts don't actually jar.
Homo naledi is a great find. It's a terrific find for South Africa, for mankind. It paints a picture of our history, all of our history. What is it that we should take out of this find, both as the religious movement, science, and the wider world?
I think we should celebrate other people's victory. You know, people have put a lot of time and energy and life work into these kind of things, and for them it's a milestone, and it takes them forward in their work. I don't think it's a particularly huge milestone in terms of who we are as human beings. I mean, we always understood, and there's been other finds that have been just as interesting. But in this moment, at this time, it is very exciting for those particular people working on this. It's exciting for us as South Africans because it's, you know, when there's a victory for one, there's a victory for all, and we need to really move away, I think, to some degree from this trying to find fault or putting down everything that happens in South Africa, and actually realizing that, you know, we're a really special people, and collectively we can do amazing things, and we should actually enjoy celebrating each other's victories.
Thank you very much, Sherilyn Dudley, coming to you live from our parliamentary studios. Yeah, we should all get together. Homo naledi, what do you think? Does it make us baboons, everybody? At SABC Newsroom is where we love you to answer our question. Of course, our question of the day today is on screen there. Can creation and evolution coexist? But, you know, if you want to add other arguments into it, please feel free at SABC Newsroom. That's where you can interact with us. Even on Facebook, we'll take some of the comments on Facebook as well and put them up if they're very interesting. A lot of interest, a lot of traction on this particular story, Homo naledi. It's an entirely new concept. Now, let's take a look at our picture of the day. This one comes from Student Village, and it's captioned, "Were you there when this happened at the University of KwaZulu-Natal Westville campus last night and today?" My question is, why do we burn our own facilities? Why do we burn our own university? It's so that we can't use the university. Everyone suffers in this way because there's a hike in administration fees. Surely there should be a different discussion. This one from Student Village, that's our captions of the day. For me, it's terrible indictment of the kind of thinking. When we want to transform, we must think about what has happened before. In this case, the University of KwaZulu-Natal is also seen as the most transformed university here in South Africa. Sad that some of its facilities, some vehicles and the like have been set alight. We should be able to have these conversations in a little bit of a different format. Anyhow, let's take a look now at the front pages from around the globe. We start in Scotland, where the Scotsman reports that more countries have rushed to reintroduce border checks to cope with a refugee crisis. This amid warnings from Germany that it is set to see at least 1 million asylum seekers this year. Moving to China, the South China Morning Post says Chengdu has the most successful economy of any mainland Chinese city. The US-based think tank has concluded after looking at such factors as job growth, foreign investment in high value-added industries. And finally, Nigeria, the Vanguard reports that movement for the actualization of the sovereign state of Biafra Masup has accused the police in Abia state of brutalizing members and stopping them from celebrating the 16th anniversary of the movement at the Christ the King Cathedral Catholic Parish along Asa Road in the city there. Quick look at what's happening around the country here in South Africa. We start in Pretoria, the North Gauteng High Court, where the first witness will take the stand in the murder inquest of 17-year-old Annika Smith, who was raped, killed, and had a body mutilated in 2010. Today will be the first time that the victim's parents will hear from witnesses about the circumstances surrounding their daughter's death. So it'll be interesting then. In Johannesburg, the trial of Sindisiwe Mangele is expected to continue in the High Court. Mangele is accused of killing her boyfriend, Nkululeko Flaba Haberi, and will take to the stand today as well. And in Durban, the 44-year-old former South African Air Force colonel who allegedly killed his wife with a hand grenade is expected to apply for bail in the magistrate's court there. Interesting what is happening around the country. That's our diary. Time for us to take a break. You're watching Newsroom right here on SABC News.
Catch! Point! Sit!
Get behind Rugby World Cup 2015 on SABC.
Welcome back. Now, today is International Day of Democracy, as declared by the United Nations General Assembly in November of 2007, and that will be celebrated by the Interparliamentary Union. The UN has also invited people and organizations, both government and non-government, to commemorate the day. The theme for 2015 Democracy Day is Space for Civil Society. The UN has also called for all governments to strengthen their national programs devoted to promoting and consolidating democracy. The Assembly encouraged regional and other intergovernmental organizations to share their experience in promoting democracy. But has democracy failed all over the world, is the question that we ask today. While democracies share common features, there is no single model of democracy, and that democracy does not belong to any country, region or religion even. Now, political analyst from the University of Johannesburg, Professor David Moore, joins us in studio this morning. Very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Eben. Thanks for inviting me.
There's a day like this almost every day, it seems, but I want to get to the difficult questions first. Democracy and capitalism, the union. Has it failed around the world? Is it a system that needs to be re-looked at?
Well, I don't think it's failed, but it's always a problematic relationship, especially with the capitalism that we see emerging today with more and more inequality. And there's a contradiction as we have more democracy, even light liberal democracy, you know, elections every few years and that sort of thing, which maybe just circulate an elite. But they do offer spaces for contestation at the grassroots and trade unions and civil society. But we have political equality, but increasing economic inequality, right? So that's a contradiction, and that works its way out in many ways. Protests here, interventions, Syria, for example, you know, this was perhaps to promote democracy in certain countries' views, but what has it led to? The refugee crisis that you were talking about a few minutes ago.
How do we overcome the challenges of inequality and capitalism in itself? Do we still have capitalism? We see the banks have been bailed out all around the world by their governments and so forth. Is that even still capitalism that we see in the world today?
You're asking one of these questions that we debate forever. Look, I think as long as you have profit as a main motivation in society, it's something called capitalism. But in every society, you're going to see a different variation on that, depending to a large extent on the power from below, people who can contest it and get the material goods. Now, as long as you know, governments don't just spend too much on goodies for people, don't get too much in debt and so on, you can have capitalism work. If it fails, they get bailed out and you kind of go through this crisis. But it's, you know, the concept of democracy can be tied up with this notion of capitalism you're talking about. So democracy can mean the freedom to have private property, or the freedom to enter a business. Or it can mean the freedom of association, forming trade unions, political parties, free media. Now, these things don't always coexist. So you can have a very strong authoritarian state, but it'll be promoting this kind of democracy or capitalism or free enterprise from below. So we end up, you know, what is freedom? So they're big issues. They get worked out as people struggle on the ground, I guess, and as power holders try to keep that power. And as at the same time, I guess there's a transnationalization of capital, big business, but also a transnationalization of democracy, this idea that we have political equality, social movements, global, and so on.
You mentioned the one critical component, which is freedom. Freedom has many guises, and freedom has many wants and many needs. Is freedom, or has freedom been good for the planet?
Next time you have to ask my colleague, your former colleague, Lawrence Hamilton, who's at WITS and has written this very interesting book, Are South Africans Free? Where he describes freedom as access to information, access to the knowledge that will enable us to make good choices about this freedom that we have. And I'd have to say, yes, in its totality, freedom's a good thing. But is your freedom, let's just say you're a big capitalist, to offer your workers any wage possible, does that detract from my freedom as a worker? And my freedom as a worker to associate and to form a trade union, to challenge you, there are going to have to be some trade-offs within that organization, right? So, in a sense, I guess we go back to that conundrum we were talking about a few minutes ago, is economic freedom, freedom to have a decent life, freedom from death, freedom from illness, versus these other sorts of more classical freedoms in the liberal discourse, civil liberties. I don't think you can take them apart. I think in the end, workers, poor, have to have the freedom to challenge their superiors, the dominant classes.
What about South Africa? The last 21 years, there are a lot of criticisms about what we've done. Some say we could have done better, we should have done better. Democracy, has it worked for us?
I think it's still working. And this is a parliamentary association day, right? And so parliamentary democracy in South Africa is robust, as we know. We've had the State of the Union address where certain members of parliament were ejected, the sort of issues of decorum in parliament. I don't think, you know, these basic institutions have really been challenged. They've been strengthened by new political forces on the floor. Young, maybe somewhat populist, authoritarian in makeup, you know, the EFF. Are they really democratic inside? What about gender democracy? What about all of these other issues? So on that score, in spite of all its problems, which are those of inequality, those of massive unemployment, what is South Africa doing about the refugees that you were talking about in Europe? You know, it's a global issue, massive issue, incredibly difficult for states. How do they maintain a floor of social welfare to all people who are coming into the country, which is in the Constitution? I mean, this is a fantastic Constitution. I was hearing on SAFM yesterday that only 46% of South Africans really know what that Constitution is all about. So, you know, constitutional democracy, how many people know about it? South Africa is actually doing very, very well, I would say, in the context of, look at Nigeria, Boko Haram, look at Kenya, look at Zimbabwe. These are incredibly much more difficult situations, and all in all, South Africa is kind of a bastion of good things.
Dictatorship, autocracy, there's elements on the rise in the world. Are you concerned about this? And then when we talk about democracy being in difficulty, are there any alternatives that we could look at, that we could think about even?
Well, you know, there's always discourse here about the developmental state. Now, if you want to look at the real developmental states, they were in East Asia and perhaps China.
Yeah.
What democracy is there? Did the trade-off work? You know, though in those situations, probably yes. If we look at other parts of the world, the bastions of democracy. Here we have, what was it, yesterday, a few days ago, David Cameron saying that the Labour Party is now a threat to national security. And we have Donald Trump in the United States. I mean, what is the level of, you know, popular discourse about democracy in the United States? So at all these levels, it's going to be one of these continuously contested and fought over concepts. I'd rather not have a dictatorship. You know, I'm an academic. We really cherish our academic freedom and those sorts of elements which lead to more creativity, popular discussions, deep discussions. Not the sort of thing you were talking about is, you know, we just destroy our institutions, which can come about because of misunderstanding of democracy, a history of a democracy that was fought for with violence, and moving out of that sort of path is difficult. But getting the goods as well. I mean, you know, people are going to fight to retain what they have too. So it's actually fairly early days for democracy worldwide. And any people who thought that with the end of the Cold War there was going to be a liberal peace, I think they're going to have to think again.
With the kinds of inequality that the world is battling with, the constant wars, the refugee crises, all these scenarios we see climate change and so forth, planet being somewhat in peril. Do we still celebrate a day like the International Day of Democracy, or is it time for us to have a kind of an overview?
Well, I think we do both, and the way to celebrate it is really to have an overview and think of, and also an historical overview, because if we look back to the turn of the last century when there was another huge migration wave, I mean, the United States is, you know, full of the Europeans and people escaping the pogroms in Russia. So we have a massive historical bank upon which to draw, but we've also got new elements. Like you can go on Facebook and find the best smugglers to take you to Europe, you know. So another technology in the way it is kind of increased these contradictions, which are democratic. So I think we're talking about an increase in democratic contradictions.
That's a wonderful way to leave us today. Thank you. That's Professor David Moore from University of Johannesburg. He's also a political analyst. Join us today to talk about this concept, democracy. What are your views? Well, I have my own views. I can't really air them. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
But for joining us, we move on. The University of KwaZulu-Natal's Westville campus descended into chaos yesterday when student protesters went on a rampage, damaging buildings and burning at least 2 cars. The protest is understood to centre on a decision to close what is known as the Registration Appeals Committee process. The ANC Youth League says this decision will exclude students from disadvantaged communities. Meanwhile, the Vaal University of Technology has promised that cameras will be installed at that institution soon, following the death of 2 female students who were killed at an off-campus residence. Let's take a look at some of the views that's been coming in on social media with regards to both these stories. Wayne talks about the March protest for safety look to continue at the Vaal University of Technology. Yes, cameras will be installed, as I just reported to you there. Spelele says KZN students have legitimate reason to protest disbandment of Registration Appeals Committee, but destruction of property is criminal. Absolutely criminal it is. Tabo says the murder of 2 Vaal University of Technology students brings lectures at the institution to a standstill. Then Katlejo says, let's protest every year for the same reasons, because the SRC is invisible the rest of the time and accomplices nothing else, says Katlejo. Very concerning. Ari Singh says, KZN actually quite sad that an educational institute becomes a battleground. Yes, we saw that. There you see an individual shielding himself on campus with an ironing board. Very, very concerning, isn't that? An ironing board, of all things, my word. What a picture. And there, fires on campus. Campus on fire, one should rather say. Very sad indeed. Let's take a look now at what's happening on our Facebook page. Gold mining companies are back at the negotiating table with trade unions to try and conclude a wage agreement and thus avoid a crippling strike. Sri Lanka's new government yesterday said it was setting up a South Africa-style Truth and Reconciliation Commission to look into atrocities during its civil war, as it came under renewed pressure to prosecute perpetrators. And the European Union interior ministers are meeting in Brussels to try to tackle the refugee crisis. Search for SABC Newsroom on Facebook. Like our page and we'll give you all the latest updates. Time for us to take a break. We'll be back a little bit shortly, actually.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. The Public Enterprises and Energy Portfolio Committee is expected to conduct an inspection at Eskom's Kusile power station today after the death of a worker in a crane collapse. 4 others were injured in the collapse at the power station in Witbank in Mpumalanga. Construction work has been temporarily halted pending the outcome of an investigation. The situation outside the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Westville campus remains tense this morning. Students' organisation SASCO has warned that protests at the campus will be intensified and possibly spread to other campuses. The university was closed yesterday after students damaged property and set vehicles alight. Students are protesting an increase in registration fees for 2016. And the woman accused of murdering rapper Nkululeko Flaba Habedi is expected to take to the stand in the High Court sitting in Randburg today. Sindisiwe Wanwele has admitted that she fatally stabbed the rapper at his home in Alexandra in March this year. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just simply search for SABC Newsroom. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Thanks, Anine. Yesterday, we brought you the story of a demonic game which has been making the rounds in schools across the country. Charlie Charlie, the game in which the so-called spirit of Charlie is called up and asked questions. He then responds by moving certain objects. Earlier this year, a Durban teenager allegedly committed suicide due to his involvement with these type of what they call satanic rituals now. Principals from several primary and high schools have since banned the game, saying any pupil caught playing it will be expelled immediately. Now, games like this one have been around for a long time, but it seems that social media has now allowed for these type of practices to be shared all over and become very popular overnight. Hence, the Charlie Charlie hashtag. Now, to talk about the role of social media in cases like this, we are joined by the Managing Director of Roy Africa, Tonya Khoury. Good morning, Tonya. Nice to have you back with us.
Good morning, Evan. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Interesting. What have you picked up with hashtag Charlie Charlie on the different social media platforms?
Well, I had a really good look yesterday at this story, and it seems to me that it's very much South America centric. It seems to be focused in the South America region more than anywhere else in the world. We brought some charts with us today. At the bottom right, you can have a look at the heat map, and you'll see that the continent of South America glows red more than anywhere else.
Yes.
So I think that's where it originated. It seems to have started in Mexico, and it seems to have spread through the South American continent. Not very big in the rest of the world. South Africa is on the chart, definitely on the chart.
Yes, you be in red.
Yeah, we're definitely glowing red. It seems to me there's an awful lot of hoax stuff out there.
Okay.
People on Twitter posting their own Charlie Charlie video and making fun of the so-called satanic ritual. The worrying thing, obviously, Eben, is the fact that the only way to get out of the Charlie Charlie challenge itself is by killing yourself.
Killing yourself.
You know?
We've seen some suicides.
Yeah, so that makes it something that worth paying attention to. But we've seen these throughout our lives. You know, we had the Ouija board and
the glass. When I was a kid, we played with a glassy thing.
Exactly.
All that kind of stuff. But,
exactly.
But we didn't have to kill ourselves to stop playing it.
We didn't, which is true. So yeah, we've had a look across the world. News media contributing a good third of the coverage to the Charlie Charlie challenge, and then social media following behind. South Africa, it comes in at the top 4 in the countries across the world reporting on the Charlie Charlie challenge or talking about it in social media. So we're ahead of places like Mexico, where it originated, and Peru, and some other South American countries. United States always top of the pile because of the size of their media platforms. Brazil is number 2 on the pile, and then Spain. So it's a big story. It's definitely amongst the youth. It's got a lot of parents worried. I think from a parent's perspective, it's always good to go and do your own investigation to see what's being said out there.
What are parents talking about on social media with regards to this? I'm sure everyone's concerned. I mean, I'm concerned. I've got a 14-year-old boy. I've spoken to him. He's been introduced to this kind of thing at school, but I don't quite know how to take this matter on with a school or what. You know, what kind of recourse does one have?
I think there is quite a bit of panic. What's interesting is on our charts, what was highlighted was Boksburg more than any other area in Gauteng as an area that's really concerned about the challenge. I think the advice to parents at home is to go and do your investigation. It really isn't as big a deal as what we tend to panic as parents, obviously, right? So I think go and do your homework. Like I said, there's a lot of spoof out there, and there's a lot of children who are taking the mickey out of the Charlie Charlie challenge more than they are taking it seriously. But there's always those selected few that are taking it
what
to
are
another
people
level.
saying about the legitimacy of let's call it the witchcraft element in it, where Charlie talks to you and things move? Some scientists say, no, it's just gravity. What are people saying about this?
I also saw that gravity insert. It was quite a big one as well, and it was heralded across social media networks that it is just simply gravity moving the pencil or the pen or whatever it is they're using. And yeah, I think there's a lot of misconception out there, and I don't think there should be too much panic. I think it comes to the children themselves. If they're going to take it seriously, you have a problem, you know, and that's when you should engage your child on a different level and explain that probably is just gravity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But we do see this kind of sharing happening a lot, though.
We do. And we've seen a lot of satanic or demonic type stuff coming out over the past couple of years. I mean, we had that satanic temple open up in the States. That caused a big outcry on social media. So, yes, there are these things out there, but they were there before. We just didn't have social media before to make it into such a big fuss.
You mentioned that. Is there a general spike in kids interacting with Satanism and demonic practice and so forth on the platforms?
Not as far as I've seen, not compared to things like following Kylie Jenner and posting things like that. So I think the element of youth and innocence is still there.
They still have their priorities. They still have their priorities in order then, Tonya.
Let's hope so.
Thanks for joining us this morning. Tonya Kure is the Managing Director of Roy Africa. She always comes in and gives us fantastic stories, or fantastic background to these stories. There's always mass hysteria that surrounds all these kinds of news stories, I can tell you. And Tonya says, well, the kids aren't more involved than what they've always been. So we shouldn't panic, but we should keep an eye on how they manage themselves on social media. Thanks again, Tonya.
You're welcome.
Now, just before I go, more than 1,700 firefighters are working to contain the valley, to try and contain the fire that broke out Saturday afternoon near Cobb, California. That's north of San Francisco. According to the California Fire Department, the blaze, which has scorched more than 62,000 acres and destroyed 585 homes was 10% contained as of Monday evening. Some of the views and some of the pictures are absolutely stunning. Well, that's one of the pictures on social media. Lots of destruction, lots of vehicles being burnt, lots of homes being burnt. Of course, heart goes out to American friends affected by the California fires, says Rebecca Cheney. Batista says, if you believe in God or any kind of higher power, please say a prayer for the people of California, victims of the fire. Orion, our thoughts go out to Northern California as they battle these wildfires. Yes, it's been one of the driest years there, and that's why the fires are totally out of control. Bert says, clouds are rolling in. Come on, rain. Yes, they should be doing the rain dance in Northern California. Need a bit of rain there. Sarah says, is it just me or is the general public eerily quiet about one of our states just burning away? The northern parts of California on fire. Well, we just missed that picture, but we've got to go. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the show, of course, always available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom, where we love it in the morning.